What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we are coming at you each and every week with a fresh service to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. And what better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm Caleb Pearson. To my far right, once again, Ashton Berzio. Ashton.
What is up?
It is so good to see you, man.
It's been a long time.
I haven't seen you in weeks. Joining us again, the middleman, the guy, the legend, Senior Pastor Mark Carey. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
Very well.
You good? You happy to be here? It's 2020, and we're back.
2020.
The boys are back. Hey, look at us. Huh? Look at us.
Please
It is so good.
Yeah.
And you know what I realized? In that little pre-typed intro, coming at you each and every week. This is definitely the first time in 3 weeks we're coming at them. But that's okay.
Well, holiday break.
Tis the season, right? Super duper busy.
So can we trust anything you say after that?
Yeah, probably not, but maybe the Lord's in here somewhere. Thank you guys so much for listening again. You can find us on podcast services all over the place, including the HD video on YouTube. You can see our nice new table, Ashton. 2020's coming up, all sermon spotlight. Guys, before we jump into a Sunday in review, I was in Israel for 12 days. Super fun. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about that trip. I won't go into, obviously, significant detail or anything. And if you guys have any questions or inquiries about that, I'd be happy to answer. But, man, it was so much fun. I'll tell you, going over there with 80 people, though, it's intense. I was like, what is this going to look like? And so, obviously, we had two different buses going. We kind of had a prophecy bus and an adventure bus. And so Don and Charlie were with the prophecy bus, obviously. And then Dennis, Courtney, and I kind of took over the adventure bus. It was tons of fun. But touring a country in 12 days is pretty daunting.
Pretty small country, though.
Yeah, well, it is small. And so even in the Saturday morning class that we had to prepare for the trip, they overlaid it on a map of the East Coast. And you basically get to see how small it is. Yeah. But even with that, I feel like I got to see a little of a lot, if that makes sense. I mean, you're surveying,
It's crazy.
At the peak visitation level of each of these sites. You're most interested, and then it's like time to move on. That's a little fragment of what's going on. But it's super. I mean, have you been to Israel? Okay. How many times have you been? When was the last time you were there?
Oh, we just went once. It was 12 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, you get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It just, I mean, you're driving along, and at some point, 3-4 days into it, it's just like, oh, yeah, there's the tomb that Jesus was in. There's the Mount Calvary. Okay, there's you drive past a pile of rocks, and it's a famous place, but they haven't even started to dig it up yet.
Right.
So it's overwhelming.
Yeah, and even that was true for a lot of it, but then there were a few elements and sites where it was almost the flip side of there was so much new development and newer buildings, newer people. I mean, we would visit a site, and one thing that surprised me was it just feels like I'm in downtown Winchester right now. But they're basically saying, well, no, 2,000 years ago, this was it. Or it's below us. Yeah. There were a lot of sites where the rocks we're standing on are pretty old. They're 500 years old. Below them are 2,000-year-old rocks. And so a lot of the sites you're going downstairs and under buildings, and then they have all these museums underground, basically. But it was really cool. Ashton, have you been to
No,
Israel
I haven't
before?
No.
Oh, okay.
I appreciated all the posts on the Fellowship Family Facebook group.
Yeah, it was fun.
Little plug for that. But just the ability to kind of travel a little bit with the group and see the videos of you guys singing and all the pictures.
St. Anne's.
Yeah, and the mantra of the whole trip was, what was your favorite part of the day? What was your favorite site? All this, and this. And my favorite part happened to just be sitting on the southern steps of the old temple, and Mark led worship for us. And so it wasn't a tour guide. Yeah, it wasn't a tour guide driven moment. It was almost a break moment. Let's go here and let's do this. Those stairs happened to be the very same ones, Jesus walked on. And we sang, O come, Emmanuel. And I'll never look at that song the same again. I only would ever sing that, during Christmas. But to just think I'm where he was. It was a really, really cool trip. And it was funny because we come home and a lot of people were freaking out about the foreign tensions and the things happening with Iran. I was like, we just flew to Paris and then home. It was a non-issue, but it was cool to be over there. And there was one moment where we got to see the different borders of the different countries. We could see Lebanon. We could see all the different activity.
Amazing. Yeah.
And they're basically saying things are cool here for now, but you see over that mountain, you don't want to be standing over there. But it was just really cool to put it all in perspective. So good to be back. Still on an Israeli sleeping schedule.
You're kidding.
Dude, by 9 p.m. I'm out like a light.
So
And then I get up at like 5 and 6,
So,
which
I
is
know you do have a little hummus on your cheek there.
okay. First time I ever had hummus.
Ear, but.
First time I ever had hummus in Israel, and apparently it's way better than our hummus. I don't really know what that
Probably
means, but I'm not gonna be trying our hummus anytime soon. But yeah, no, dead asleep by 9, up at 6. It's pretty cool. I like it. If there's ever a time to switch to a morning person, it's now, because once I go back.
Apparently, I've been on an Israeli sleep schedule for the last 3 years.
That's right. It's the kids. But yeah, no, it was tons of fun. So it'll be cool for everybody to be able to converse with everyone that they missed over the weeks, and starting the new year on the Dead Sea and stuff. It was just really cool.
Yeah.
It felt like we kicked off.
You guys had a baptism service too, is that right?
We did, yeah. That was on the Sea of Galilee before we ended up at the Dead Sea, but it was really cool. And that was a gentleman on the other bus.
Yeah.
And what was cool about the trip was we had to figure out, are we with them or are we not? And so we basically weren't with them. They had their trip, we had ours. But you're lodging in the same places, you're starting and ending each day around each other.
Yeah.
So it was cool to have those passing moments and conversations, and then moments where they say, let's do a group devotional. And there happened to be one specific day of devotions. I think it was the pool of Bethesda or something, one of the pools. But Dennis started doing our devotional, and the other group came around the corner up the valley, like on the other side of the valley.
Photobombed you.
Photobombed, yeah. Started throwing rocks at us and all sorts of stuff. No, and so the tour guide said, let's ask them. We all had headsets. And so he said, let's tell them to switch their channel to Dennis so they can join our devotional. And so then we see all 40 of them standing on this other mountainside, turning their channel and attention, and they're opening up their Bibles. And it was chilling to see that happen. Because I was just like,
chilling can be a bad term.
Like no, in a good way. Okay. I was mortified. I was like, why is Don staring at me like that? But no, it was
freaks you out.
It was just really cool impromptu devotional.
That's neat.
Yeah,
and we're fortunate again to have Don and Charlie, and then now Dennis. In
right.
That, To their, they've been doing this for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And I hope it'll continue. Maybe we'll see. But
yeah, it was super fun. Really exciting way to start 2020. We'll jump into a little bit of a Sunday in review here too, but I also this is our first podcast of the year. I know there's a lot coming up. It's a special year for Fellowship Bible Church this year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about almost what's to come in 2020 in general. It's our 40th anniversary year, right? Is there a specific date where that's a thing, or was it like a...
Yeah, we've always said kind of June.
Yeah.
The month of June is
cool.
The church got
pool party.
The families got together early in the year, and then by the time they officially formalized as a church,
gotcha. It was that first weekend in June, right?
Yeah, of 1980.
Yeah.
Wow. How many years before you being born is that?
I was born in 89, 30.
Oh wow, that's cool. Man, that's awesome. Yeah, it'll be really exciting. I know there's some things in the works to celebrate that and look back at all that the Lord has done, and then look ahead to see what He will do. So
yeah, I know one thing tied to that preparation and celebration. I think it's good to celebrate these kinds of milestones and things. Not to elevate Fellowship Bible Church as any great organization or any kind of special thing, but to really to remember and reflect on what God has done through really the faithfulness of those first families, and then just over the years. And we just want to encourage any of you listening. We have we want to capture stories. We always want to capture stories. Always want to hear what God is doing. I think that's something that is a part of gathering, is a part of being a part of the church, is sharing stories and encouraging each other. So there's a place online. It's under the Give tab on the .life. You can share a story. You don't have to even tie your name to it, but we'd love to celebrate with everybody here what God has done over these last 40 years.
Yeah, and again, give us the awareness of these stories too.
Right.
If we come across a story that's so awesome, he's like, how did I never hear about that?
Right.
And it's awesome because we didn't know how to deliver it, or you didn't know how to say it. And I think that's what's so good just about our website and about these different podcasts now, is there's a way to submit your thoughts or let your voice be heard in a way that otherwise it would have been much harder to do. So definitely check out the website and feel free to submit to the podcast channels and find us on all those different sites so we can be a part of the conversation together. I think that's the whole idea here.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, let's jump into a Sunday in review. Again, we're doing this Romans series, and you'll have to forgive me. I wasn't here. I was still in Israel 2 Sundays ago. Did we launch the Romans focus that Sunday?
Yep, did an introduction.
Introduction. Okay.
Those first 3 verses, right?
Well, 1 through 7.
1 through okay, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, good. So Paul's greeting, and then that makes more sense as far as, starting with verse 8. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit and almost where we're headed over this next focus season. But I also wanted to mention, I sat in downstairs on that first of 3 intensives with John Morrison. What is that, an ALC?
It's just like
focus?
a 3-week course
Just a
to
3-week
intro
course.
the focus, yeah.
And then he mentioned it's going to continue upstairs in a smaller forum of some sort. I forget exactly if it's one specific ALC class, but nevertheless, it was so awesome because a large amount of people showed up, like big time. Shout out to Greg Perkins and JVD, because we 3 were kind of looking at each other like, all right, let's go get some chairs. And I mean, we were filling chairs in that room until 25 minutes into his talk. We were printing more packets, and so to see the engagement and I think the excitement.
It's an important topic.
Yeah.
It struck a nerve with folks, and they want to know. We're living in a interesting time, and
and it was just cool because I could see, and the way John Morrison structured it was so good, but I could tell people wanted to be equipped. It was already personal, this whole situation. They're already up against it, and at least in my mind, from what I could see from people. And so how do I deal with this? How do I think about it? How do I articulate my thoughts, my beliefs, my opinion in a way that doesn't cut off relationship? Because I think that's what happens now.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know John Avery, Family Life Team, Morrison, and the counseling team. They put a lot of prayer, a lot of thought into this. They've got a lot of great resources. You can go to the Home Center, go to our website, click on the PDFs that are listed there. Lots of good stuff. So there's a lot of self-educating materials there that you can go to, and not only just depend on the classes and what's being shared, because that's only a small part of what has been the time and effort that's been put into this. Good stuff.
Yeah, very good stuff. I mean, it's such a delicate truth. So to be able to balance it and feel equipped by the Holy Spirit to do that, I think is super important. Mark, I've had a few people ask if this Romans sermon series is gonna talk about any of that stuff as far as the focus is concerned.
Well,
anything to speak to
in
that?
a way, it already has.
Sure.
We'll get into this last sermon and then a little bit that's coming up. Chapter 1 of Romans, and actually chapters 1 through 3 lay out. It's really a biblical worldview. Why are we in the mess we're in? And this focus that we're doing is a response to the mess of sin. It's gender dysphoria, gender confusion, all these things that is precipitating why we're doing this focus is because of a heart of sin. We live in a fallen world, and that's what Romans chapter 1 is talking about. The wrath of God, verse 18, has been manifested, is being revealed, present tense, against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth. We're living in a world where truth is being suppressed. It always has been. Ever since the serpent slipped into Eve and said, did God say, the truth is being suppressed. We're just living in our particular little piece of earth existence. We're seeing it and experiencing it in our day and age in a different way than we have never experienced it before, where truth is being suppressed, and then God, in his, as it says, the wrath of God, the anger of God is being revealed. And what does he do? Verse 24, verse 26, verse 28 of chapter 1, he gives them over. He removes, as it were, his gracious restraining almost, and in a judicial abandonment. You want to live that way? You want to suppress the truth? You want to ignore me? You want to glorify yourself and not glorify me? You want to honor yourself and not honor me? Okay, have at it. And sin in its malignancy, man is assigned to the destruction, to the death of what the natural consequences of sin is going to be. And so the focus is simply addressing how we maneuver and swim in a world that's been abandoned to the sin and depravity of the human heart. Romans 1 is talking about. I've mentioned that 3 words can kind of summarize the book of Romans: God's good news. But in order to understand good news, you got to realize there's bad news, and Paul will take the first 3 chapters and build on that. So that's
Yeah, no, that's really good. And even we were doing this ecclesiology group with some of the new mentors in the mentorship program, and one thing they asked us, kind of, we were talking about Paul and planting churches, is, well, what does it mean when, is it God judging and pouring sin onto these people? Almost that element of, is God a punisher? And that language you brought up was, he's giving way.
It's more of a passive.
He's withdrawing.
You're right.
He's withdrawing his goodness to let you reap what you sow.
Gives them over.
Yeah. Which paints a better picture, I think, to help digest who God is and how he doesn't. He's dealt with sin, but he's not gonna protect you in your willingness to embrace it. It's just a very interesting dynamic, and I know it addresses that question of, how could there be a God with all this evil? I can't believe somebody would harm somebody else like this. And it's just saying, like, the party responsible for that harm and that sin is not your loving God.
No.
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead,
Sure.
but I think that this is extremely relevant to the focus, and I think it was a little intentional. If you look ahead in chapter 1, the first thing that happens when God gives them over is idolatry and the perversion of who God is and what they're worshiping. And then the second thing that happens is lust and impurity and sexual relations, exchanging the truth of God for a lie. So there's this replacing of God, and there's just defiling of the sexual nature of man. And I think that's because what God has given us in sexuality and male and female, creating us in that way, and then the gift of that relationship between a husband and a wife, that is one of the most good and sacred things that God has given us. And of course it's going to be one of the most twisted and defiled things that sin and really the devil will twist and mar. So I think it's hugely relevant. And, within the context of a focus, like the last focus, we had a sermon series that fit really well with the focus. That's not the norm for the goal of these focuses. It's really more to be an all church thing that things like the sermons might point to throughout, might things would be drawn out, and some application might be a part of the focus. But then, in children's ministry and in students and in small groups and in events that we scatter throughout, that's kind of where that focus material comes in.
Well, and the sermon is always to instill thought too. I think at first glance, people think, oh, what's the focus going to be? What's Mark Carey going to focus on? It's not for him.
Yeah.
You're one of the church, and you can focus on it, buddy. But what I'm saying is, it's for us to focus on.
I feel affirmed today.
So if we can listen to him talk about Romans while focusing ourselves on identity and sexuality from a biblical perspective, it's going to, I think, Mark, you nailed it. It's going to come out naturally in those scriptures. Yep. And it's going to equip you to deal with that more personal application that is the time we're living in.
And by the way, FYI, these classes, and like what John did Sunday, it's online.
Yep.
It's already online. You can, if you missed it, or even if you heard it, you need to go back. You can go and get all of this stuff.
We recorded it for real?
Yeah.
There's a camera.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Well, not
just audio.
Oh, okay.
So
cool.
Yeah, easiest place to find it is fellowshipathome.org/identity.
Okay.
That's kind of where all of our resources are for these focuses.
Yeah. Awesome.
We'll upload them there.
Yeah, it was super good, and even the printout he had down there, he didn't get quite through all of it, but it was just so good. It was a huge foundation for the next 2 weeks downstairs, and then more to come upstairs for sure. Ashton, I don't know if anything specifically stood out to you this past Sunday, but there were a few things I wanted to talk about. Mark, you already hit on it briefly, but that whole idea of God's good news. When I was going through the mentorship, one of the most impactful kind of study techniques for me was always what does the text say? What do the words mean? Because gospel of salvation is vague. Good news of rescue. From what? You know, what is the good? If I could give Ashton the gospel, that doesn't, of what? The good news of what? Or the salvation, the rescue from something. And so I like the way you brought that up and mentioned it again, because it's hearkening on, okay, well, do I know the gospel? Can I flesh out the gospel? And I think it's so important, and Paul reminds us what we need saving from.
And so that, and we'll unpack this as we study the book of Romans, but I really do think that you can summarize the gospel, that what is the essence of the good news. And he tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, I make known to you the gospel, that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, and that he rose again. Now, there's something about the death of Christ and the life of Christ that's going to factor in very heavily in his argument as he lays this foundational doctrinal treatise called the book of Romans. Everything comes back to who Jesus is, what Jesus has done. And that good news about Jesus is powerful, he says, to rescue us, to save. Now, then again, you have to define, because we always jump to the idea saved means, from getting out of hell, or, it's eternal destruction. And a few times it's used that way, but it's an expansive term. It goes
Saved
beyond that. Right. So you got to define in the context. And he goes right into it in verse 18 again, for the wrath of God is revealed. And okay, wait a minute. And it's currently being revealed. So how am I rescued from the current manifestation of God's wrath? That's why I went to Habakkuk, because he quotes Habakkuk. There was something in Paul's mind that triggered, by divine inspiration, this idea of quoting Habakkuk, because Habakkuk lived in a day where God's anger was being manifested. And here he is. How am I going to survive in this world? The righteous shall live by faith. Now, that's all applied into the New Testament era with the gospel of Christ's death and resurrection. And hopefully we'll see this coming Sunday, because there's that verse 17, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God unto salvation to rescue us. For in it, it says in verse 17, in this message of the death and resurrection of Christ, in that message, the righteousness of God is revealed. So before he mentions wrath of God is revealed, he mentions the righteousness of God is revealed. Now he's going to hold off on explaining that till later. He's going to dive into the wrath of God being revealed. But he teases us a little bit in that verse 17 by saying that the whole power of the gospel rests in this idea that God's righteousness, his rightness, is revealed. And if we're living as unrighteous people in an unrighteous world, what do we need? The righteousness of God. And so he'll unpack that in these chapters to come.
It's really good. Yeah, I love the way it quotes Habakkuk. I mean, if you study that book, and in those few chapters where he goes from asking God and imploring God, where are you? And then he says, oh, there you are, God, and you're bigger and bolder than I ever thought you were. You're in control big time, beyond what I was even initially asking you to be in control of. And to see that dynamic unfold, and then to see, again, Paul, hearken back to that, and that speaks to inerrancy of Scripture. It speaks to the story as a whole. And I don't know if it's just unique to maybe more famous or more common books, but even the book of Romans, you hear so often, the Romans road to salvation, and here's all these scriptures that get you into heaven. And Paul's like, I was writing to people that know the Lord and are going to heaven. They're just stumbling along the way. And it's easy to dive so far into the book of Romans that you forget the book of John and realize, what did Jesus do versus what do we do in response to that to avoid further harm, in a path of sanctification. So I just think it's really good the way.
Yeah, and when he quotes Habakkuk in 2:4, and he says, "The righteous shall live." So now we have to define what life is really like. You mentioned John's Gospel, eternal life. What is it? What is it that God is offering us, and what is it His righteousness has revealed to us that brings life to us? I quoted Jeremiah 17, 7 through 8, 7 and 8 in there. At the same time as Habakkuk lived, and Jeremiah is saying, those who trust in the Lord, and when there's when there's a drought and there's no supply of water, the righteous are still going to be green. Life. And we are living in a day and age, and it has been since the beginning of time.
Yep.
Life was sucked out of this perfect creation when the serpent came to Adam and Eve. And sin, this world was plunged into death because he said, the day you eat of it, you're going to die. What do we need? We need life. And the good news is that even in the midst of a messed up world, lost in sin, and the wrath of God is being manifested as every moment of the day, in the midst of that, God's people can still live. They can still experience life. And now we're going to have to wait till Romans 6, 7, and 8 to really get into what that's all about.
Right.
But there's good news. So I think there's great practical application to this. I want people at the beginning here, I think God did too. That's why he structured Romans this way. We need to feel the weight of living in a sinful world, and but understand it in a proper theological, biblical way. Every day, people listening to this podcast right now, they will witness and they will experience. They will hear about it, but they will also experience the death all around them.
Yep.
And the good news is we can have life,
right?
But it's the righteous man who will live, and it's by faith. So anyway.
Well, I mean, Paul was masterful, obviously, in this and inspired by the Spirit, but just, like you said, putting it in the context of the righteousness of God and the power of God for salvation before he delves into all of the mess. It's in the proper context, so it's not this beating them over the head with sinful and what the world is like, and but he does frame it in the context of God's righteousness and God's what he's doing through it. And it's one of the most complete, I think, 3 chapters of really understanding the human condition, and Paul leaves no room for any kind of question or doubt of the sinfulness of man and what the need of man to be rescued. There is no way that you can read the first 3 chapters and think we'll be okay.
Yeah, we'll figure it out on our own.
And until 3:23, in the middle of that chapter, we're going to feel that weight. And I think that's okay. And I appreciated you bringing the gospel into it and not necessarily leaving people each week in that. But I think there is a value to it, with the knowledge that we're going to get to the but God in 3:23. It's going to come.
And it comes after all that stuff. I mean, it speaks to the way the story actually unfolded for us, and it speaks to the encouragement of. I wonder how many people study Romans and get discouraged or turned off to the idea of studying Romans before they get to the good news.
Yeah.
And remember what Paul said in his introduction. He says, I want to come to Rome, and he said, I want to impart a spiritual benefit to you.
And encourage you.
And so you will be established, so that you will be strengthened.
Right.
So that's the ultimate goal. So it's the good news is going to establish us, but we got to understand the bad news.
Yeah, something that I was able to go through this a couple times. I think in college, just a couple guys really invested in me, and we went through Romans, I think, as a group, one of my discipleship groups, and one of the most powerful and transformative spiritual times in my life of just walking through this. And we spent a long time in those first 3 chapters. And one of the things that we talked about was there's a line that we're walking in life, and at the point of the cross and salvation, there should be this split where our view of God continually grows, and as our view of God grows, our view of ourself and our sinfulness grows. But it's split, so that the more we understand our depravity and who we are, the greater our view of the righteousness of God is, and it's
and our need of Him.
Our need of Him.
And our need of Him. And I've seen that exact graphic depicted where the further along that path you go, the bigger the cross gets between the two.
Yeah.
And so if you're struggling down here, a mature Christian living or struggling in sin is at a point where they know a God, hopefully, to where that huge cross can be impactful. They can remember, wait a second, Am I Habakkuk here, forgetting how big my God is and what he's taking care of?
Because what's the alternative? If you're not focusing on that,
Yeah.
what are you focusing on?
Right.
Well, the circumstances,
Right.
the problems,
Right.
the sin of the world, the mess that's all around us, and that can get really discouraging.
And if we are focusing on the problems and then coming to church in an effort to find the solution, instead of trying to focus on the solution and taking it to the problems, it flips the reason for church. It flips the posture and perspective we ought to have as we do this stuff. And so even speaking to just a church life response, the application of what we've done so far, again, it's all visionary. And I think it was probably 5 to 7 times he said, we'll get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. And then you just said, so come to church. Like, what's the application of Sunday's message? Be here in a week. That's the come and be a part of this. Be a part of this mutual encouragement that Paul speaks about.
Right.
And even we did, it was last year, now it's Old Testament survey, but it used to be New Testament survey down with the youth Sunday mornings. You do one book a week, so you're flying through a book. But one thing I challenged the kids to do was find a similarity across all the books that Paul writes in the way he intros and outros each letter, to get them to realize the pattern of giving thanks, promoting peace, and praying for these people. It's not a letter that starts off with, you losers. Nobody finishes a letter that starts off with, you're a loser and here's what you're doing wrong. But it starts with, I'm so thankful for you. God is so good. Now sit down and let's talk about it a little bit.
So maybe a little bit of Galatians.
Sure.
But that was only 6 chapters.
But just really cool to think about the relational component to growing towards Christ together. And there's only one kind of person that can come back to church, and it's one who leaves it. And I don't want anybody to miss out on what we're doing, especially in this time, because I know, and I've seen it downstairs in the F3 room that's at twice the capacity. People are interested. This is valuable, pertinent information.
Yeah, and let me just insert this idea too. Is it's because you can go home or not even come, and Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, Monday you can listen to the sermon online. Look, church is far more than the sermon. It is, as Paul said there in chapter 1, mutual encouragement. And I'll tell you what, you can't do this. Is not mutual encouragement.
Right.
I mean, you can encourage someone with word letters.
Right.
This is mutual encouragement.
Right.
I want to be encouraged by each other's faith. And when the body of Christ gets together, I don't care. You can be walking down the hallway on the Lord's Day on Sunday morning, and you're connecting with people. Then in your small group times, and that face-to-face mutual encouragement. While then you get into the context of the sermons and stuff like that. It's just crucial.
Well, and it's the humanity of Christ. The humanity of Christ is being exemplified. If I'm going to church and being mutually encouraged, I'm like, man, I just saw the humanity of Ashton, and he just engaged in a conversation with me, and he had a lot of God in him when he was talking to me about it. I think it's cool to see, and that's something that you can't get if you're trying to just check off the minimal boxes of church life, especially in a year as huge as this, where we get to celebrate everything the Lord has done in this area and in this church. So really, really good. Any last things to point out with the book of Romans before we...
Just one thing. I mean, there's tons of stuff.
Right.
But
it's a loaded question, I guess.
Cut to the chase here as we're wrapping up. When Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, it's the power of God. I think we have here that, again, good news message of what Christ, let's put it in the context of the unsaved world, because Paul did say, I want to come to Rome and have some fruit, some spiritual fruit. The Greeks and the barbarians, and so he's also thinking evangelistically for sure. And I think as we understand the message of Romans and the message of the gospel, we should be emboldened. Certainly, that we should not be ashamed or be afraid. Certainly, the world is deceived and their understanding is darkened. And the 2 Corinthians 4:4, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving. But we should have a boldness because we know we have a message of life, and that's what this world needs. The people who are struggling in all sorts of issues, gripped in the darkness of this age and the sin of this world, and don't even know it, our hearts should break for them, and we should be excited because we have a solution, and we don't have to back away, and we can present a Savior who died and rose again. That is the answer. It's not in politics. It's not going to be in social reform. Hey, fine for that. But after we've done our politicking and voting, and we've done our social reforming and helping the poor, got to share the gospel.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing that is powerful to rescue.
It's really good. And yeah, just even what you said of the easiness to back off. I think we have a tendency to withdraw. But what would it look like if we were prone to welcome those who are prone to wander, to facilitate that interaction and do what Paul does I got to see the lands he traveled and the ways he walked. And one thing that surprised me about it all was, how is this that much different than 12-year-old Caleb going down to the Shenandoah River in the Blue Ridge Mountains? It wasn't that different. You read these stories and you think they're traveling miles and miles and countries. They're walking in their sandals. There were long journeys, but you could go out on the Sea of Galilee and see a 360-degree view of 90% of Jesus' life. We have that exact same thing. Go stand in your front yard, spin in a circle. There's your mission field. And so it's definitely encouraging. Ashton, what can we point people towards before we get out of here?
Well, there's a lot going on, obviously, with any focus. And we've tried to make it really easy for people to see what's going on without us having to just talk about it for 10 minutes on a Sunday morning. So the best way to just kind of see an overview is to go to fpcva.life/identity, or it's just right there when you go to fpcva.life, that first link. We've got this 3-week course happening. We've got this podcast that we're doing every Friday morning. A lot of great content with John Morrison. John and Diane have been on the first 2, or they're going to be on again this coming Friday. We've got some stories, some families that we're interviewing, and it's just a great resource. So subscribe to that, the Fellowship Family Podcast, and tons of stuff coming down. I mean, we've got
Dr. Christopher Yuan.
Yep, Christopher Yuan is coming that first weekend of February, and there's a seminar in that afternoon about how we as Christians are to respond to homosexuality. Dr. Yuan is a professor at Moody, I think, and has just a great story. He'll be here with his parents, sharing his story of his life in that area.
Amazing.
So they'll be here for the afternoon, and there's childcare for that, children's ministry. So register for that. We've got a women's event coming down on the second to last Friday of this month. It'll be great time together of dessert and coffee, and some more things coming in February, March. But yeah, just be aware. We've put all the resources out there for you. It's kind of up to people to access them and utilize them and be a part of it. And so fpcva.life/identity if you want to see the resources, some of the PDFs and the audio stuff. Fellowshipathome.org is the place to grab those.
Awesome.
So we're putting out. We have prime rib. We have incredible feasts that we're presenting. If all you eat is a hot dog, that's your own problem. I mean, we've got great stuff we're providing. So go feast on it, and don't be satisfied with.
Lesser.
Oh, the hot dog. Have you ever been to the doggery in Strasbourg?
Dude, have you ever seen how hot dogs are made? Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to talk. It's too early to talk about this.
Okay, let's wrap this up.
Yeah, just a reminder, too, all 3 podcast channels are launched and looking good, right?
Yep.
Am I correct in that assumption? So
Global Church is great.
Yeah.
This last one
It's
from
so
the Global
fun,
Church
man.
is so good. Just Scott and Jim talking about discipleship, and this one was actually just talking about discipleship and about this conference that they're going to, the resources that they use. So really great stuff to pop in and listen to.
So good. And then the Fellowship Fam podcast, too, tying into the focus. Really, really good. So if you're not subscribed on YouTube or know how to find those, please find them. Very easy to get to, and you can always look forward to that regular content in an effort to be a part of the conversation with us. The fact of the matter, you guys, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love and God bless.
When have I ever taken an hour?
An hour?
When have you taken an hour? Okay, this is good to bring. We'll bring it up briefly before we actually end.
Not meant to take an hour.
It sounds better. Well, it sounds way better than me saying are not meant to just take 42 and a half minutes before Mike Lukens gets up and closes us out. It's too long. You know what I mean? Just say an hour. It takes me at least 15 minutes to digest the spiritual truth.
Right.
We're getting out of here. We love you. God bless.